This is the bicycle top assembly video, part 3. Up to this point, we've managed to assemble the entire bicycle with the exception of the addition of the chain and the nuts and screws that fasten the bicycle together. This video will focus solely on the chain. You'll recall that the very first thing we did in this process was to insert our bike geometry file into the assembly. This is going to provide us some convenient sketches and planes for locating the chain. So let's briefly look at this geometry file. And you'll recall that there is a chain plane in this file that we will be using for aligning our chain in the assembly. The other thing we want to look at is the length of our chain stay. That's the distance from the center of the bottom bracket shell to the rear axle. We need to make sure that the chain at the center of the rear sprocket and the center of the chain ring is going to match the length of this chain stay. So we have to make some adjustments to our chain before we insert it into the assembly. So what we need to do is find out what exactly is the length of our chain stay. So just double clicking on our frame layout, we see in this case the chain stay is 41 centimeters long. That's the same as 410 millimeters. You might have a chain stay depending on the size of your bike that's either shorter or longer than this dimension. Now let's open our chain file. And you'll recall that this is a part that has been given to you in the components kit. Here's our chain. And this part is controlled by a layout sketch. And here we see in the sketch this 410 millimeter length. That's the length of the chain stay. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, you've got a much bigger bike and the chain stay is actually 420 millimeters long. We see what that does is it moves the sprocket farther away and readjusts the contour of the chain. I will finish that sketch, and now we see that there is a break in the chain because the chain has to get longer to accommodate the longer chain stay length. To fix this, what I need to do is have an extra link bridging this gap. This is an outer link and this is an outer link, so I probably want to make an extra inner link. So I will edit the inner link pattern. We see now that there are 49 bodies in this pattern. I will click one more to get 50. We see that bridges the gap. We also see that this is not perfectly aligning with the first link. Unfortunately, there's no way we can make this come out perfectly. You might also have cases where you'll have a severe overlap in order to close this gap. Your goal is just to adjust the number of outer links or the number of inner links to try to reduce either the overlap or the amount of gap between the ends of the chain. Once you've put this chain together with the rest of the bike and the sprocket is located in this area, it's probably not going to be too noticeable if this is off a little bit. Now let's look at a situation where we've got an especially short chain stay. So editing the chain layout again, I'll go down to 400. And here we see quite a lot of overlap between my links. So I can probably go back to my inner link pattern and reduce the number of links in that pattern. That bridges this gap here, and I finish. And here we have a funny overlap where we have an outer link overlapping an outer link. There's not a whole lot I can do about that, and again, I doubt anyone is going to notice that. So it's just a little bit of trial and error determining the total number of links you should have both on the outer pattern and the inner pattern. Now I've readjusted this back to 410 millimeters so I can put it into my assembly, and you'll notice that this part also includes an axis for the chain ring and an axis for the sprocket. We will use these for properly aligning the chain. Going back to our assembly, the first thing I want to do is insert the chain into this assembly file. So we insert components, we see the chain here in our box. Click on that and then just drag this out into this general area. Now the chain was drawn on its own front plane, so we can't mate the front plane of the chain to the front plane of the assembly because it'll put the chain in the wrong spot. Going down to the bottom of our feature tree, I'll open up the tree for the chain, and I will hold down my control key and select the front plane of the chain, scroll to the top, open up the bike geometry file feature tree, and select the chain plane in that file. Then mate, and we see that the chain shifted over a little bit. If I look straight on at the front of the bike, I see that the chain plane, if I highlight it here, is right down the center of the chain. Now I can still move the chain around, but it's stuck on the chain plane. This axis of the chain has to be aligned with the center of the bottom bracket, and this axis of the chain has to be aligned with the sprocket and back. If I make all of my axes visible, we see there's quite a bit of clutter here with all the alignment axes from other parts, so I will leave those hidden and just choose the axes from the feature tree for the chain. So going down to the bottom here again, I still have my chain open. And down at the very bottom is the chainring axis and the sprocket axis, so I will start mating the chainring axis with the center of the bottom bracket shell. The center of the bottom bracket shell is at our origin, so we can just mate this axis to the origin. So again, holding my control key down, I will choose the chainring axis, scroll to the top, choose the origin of the assembly, and mate. Let's take a look at how that looks. So we should just have 1 degree of freedom left on the chain. And we see that I can rotate the chain up and down, but it's pinned down at the chainring end. The axis going through this end of the chain needs to be coincident with this point, which is the intersection of the seat stay geometry line and the chain stay geometry line located in our geometry file. So scrolling to the bottom again, holding my control key, I will choose the sprocket axis in the chain and this point in the geometry file and mate. You see that rotates into position. If for some reason the chainstay length in your chain file does not match the chainstay length in the geometry file by even the slightest amount, you will not be able to make this last mate. Let's just take a look at the back end here. You recall we had a little funniness with some overlapping chain links, but there is so much going on in this area visually that it's hardly noticeable. So that completes all the major parts for the assembly. The only thing left are the nuts and the screws.